Good day, students. One of the critical elements in IGST, the Integrated Goods and Services Tax, which is unique and specific only to the IGST Act, which we are going to have a quick look at, is what is intrastate supply and vis-a-vis what is interstate supply. Why should this be bothering a person who is studying GST? The answer to that question is, if a transaction is going to be attracted under section 7 of IGST Act, then you will have to levy IGST on the transaction. Whereas if a transaction is getting attracted under section 8 of the IGST Act, it becomes an intrastate supply and one has to levy CGST and SGST on the transaction. So the basis for finding out whether a transaction is attracting CGST and SGST or IGST is determined by the provision section 7 and section 8 of IGST Act. The common notion or the misconception which I want to demystify at the start is, people generally tend to think if I am in Tamil Nadu, the recipient is going to be in Andhra Pradesh, then it will obviously become a IGST supply. Not necessary, because there are a separate set of provisions pertaining to what is place of supply. Now, what is this new word called place of supply? Yes, that is the one of the factors which are going to determine whether a transaction is interstate supply or intrastate supply. Let us get to the basics. We need two geographical locations to compare. If on our comparison, both the geographical locations are falling within the same state or union territory, then the transaction can be called as an intrastate supply. But on the other hand, if it is going to be different state or different union territory or any combination thereof, then we can simply call it as interstate supply. What are those two geographical locations? One, location of the supplier. The place where the supplier is located vis-a-vis the other comparative is going to be the place of supply. This is where I told you place of supply will have a key role to play. So the location of the supplier, what should I take? If the supplier is a registered person, the place where the supplier is registered shall be the location of the supplier. No, sir, the supplier is registered in more than one location. Then what do I take as location of the supplier? If he is registered in more than one location, then that premises or registration which is more closely connected with the rendering of that service or supply of that goods shall be treated as the location of the supplier. For example, I am a software company, I am having registrations across India in say 4 or 5 locations. But whichever development center of mine is directly connected with rendering services to a person who has given me the order, that registration shall be considered to be the place where I am located, the location of the supplier. If the supplier is not going to be a registered person, then what should I do? Then in that case, we don't have an option. We'll have to take the place of normal residence of the supplier as the location of the supplier. On the left hand side, what was the location of the supplier? We have found the basics and we are able to identify how to find out what is the location of the supplier. Now the comparative, the second element that we must know is what is a place of supply. Now section 10, 11, 12 and 13 of IGST Act specifically deals with what is location of the place of supply. In other words, what is the place of supply. Section 10 and section 11 deals with place of supply in case of goods. Section 12 and section 13 deals with place of supply in case of services. Why two sections are allocated? Because section 10 deals with the supply of goods within India, whereas section 11 deals with import and export of goods, how to find out the place of supply. Section 12 deals with how to find out the place of supply if it is going to be a situation where the location of the supplier and the location of the recipient of service both are located within India. Section 13 is going to come into the picture when either one of them, either the location of the supplier or the location of the recipient happens to be outside India. Then we have to find out the place of supply as per section 13. So coming back to our comparative, we already know what is the location of the supplier. We have that, and for each and every transaction under GST, whether it is goods or service supply, we are supposed to find out what is the place of supply. Fine. Now that we have found out both the geographical locations, the comparison which we spoke about earlier needs to be done. The comparison can result in one of the answers, that is, both of them are the same geographical state, or they are a different geographical state or union territory. If they are both going to fall within the same state, then obviously it is an intrastate supply covered under section 8. Now here we have an exception. If the person who is going to receive the supply of service, or the person who is going to give the supply of service or goods, receive the supply of service or goods, happens to be an SEZ, Special Economic Zone, then please remember the transaction will never come under intrastate supply. Why? If the person who is going to give the goods or service is going to be an SEZ, for all practical purposes, SEZ is considered to be outside India. So though they are geographically within the state, they are not considered to be within the state. Hence, the transaction will never become CGST and SGST, which means intra. It will always be other than intra. If the recipient is going to be an SEZ of goods or services, in that case also SEZ is away from the definition of India for geographical purposes. Hence, it is considered to be not a same state transaction. So it will never be intra supply of goods or services. So this is the exception that we need to be mindful of in dealing with section 8. Now moving to section 7, it is very easy to get into section 7 because whatever we saw as intra is not becoming applicable for a particular transaction. Then the transaction has to fall in only one basket, which has to be interstate supply. So whenever there is a supply, any one of them is not in that state, that is, they are not in the same state, it becomes interstate supply. Not in the same union territory, it becomes interstate supply. And if it is a supply to an SEZ, it becomes interstate supply. And very interestingly, section 7 subsection 5 deals with a situation where one SEZ is supplying to another SEZ. Now this shall also be called as interstate supply, because for the purpose of GST, one SEZ to another SEZ is also interstate supply. And finally, section 7 subsection 5 clause C says that any supply which is not intra, which cannot come within the definition of intra, shall all be called as interstate supply to cover all sort of supplies. For example, I am doing an import of service. I am in India, I am importing a software from outside India, I am downloading it, I am paying for the software. When I am downloading it, I am paying some money for them. And in this case, the supplier is outside India, the recipient is in India, and the place of supply falls in India. How? Because the recipient is in India, so the place of supply falls in India. We are liable to pay GST on this under reverse charge. But what GST? Am I supposed to pay CGST and SGST, or am I supposed to pay something else? Yes, we are not supposed to pay CGST and SGST. We are supposed to pay IGST. Why? It cannot be intra, since one of them is not in India. It can only be interstate supply. The same applies to export of goods or export of services, where the other leg, the recipient leg, is going to be outside India. So we can never tax it under intra. It can fall only within the bracket of interstate supply under section 7 of IGST Act. So this is the basis which any student of GST must have to understand what is the methodology in which I can identify the place of supply for a transaction, which will lead me into the question of whether it is an intrastate supply or an interstate supply. Once I am able to get an answer for it, I'll be able to calculate the tax accordingly and discharge my liability. For doing that, this is very, very important. So we'll catch up another time with some similar provisions which are interesting as well as enriching. Thank you.